The paper we would be looking at is named Constitutional Classifiers Defending Against Universal Jailbreaks Across Thousands of Hours of Red Teaming. And how I enjoy approaching papers, which is also part of this video, is capturing thought as you walk through the paper. So in this video, I've gone through 3 sections, which is the abstract, the intro, and the problem formulation. So those 3 parts have also condensed some of the ideas, my thoughts, based off these 3 parts. And the fun thing about that is, as I progress through the paper, I get to revisit those thoughts and see what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. It also helps with having this kind of unbounded constraints to your thinking as to not knowing the technical details enough to cross or think or have this wider range ideas. So that's what I'm doing with this paper. It's quite an interesting one from the Safeguard research team Anthropic, and I'll be alternating between this paper and a Google Doc while I walk you through this different section. So this is just like capture of thoughts and digging into the paper, also understanding what it is, what the aim is, and how this could go, different possibilities. So it's pretty fun. Now that's the paper, good authors. And for the doc this is the doc, and these are just the areas that have been covered. For this video, these are the areas that I've compiled my thoughts into. So starting with problem and contribution, basically its paper is aiming at universal jailbreaks, which is an interesting systematic way of getting responses from this large language model. It's systematic, and the most important thing about universal is it's reliable. If you get your hands on one, you can reliably get response. So it doesn't really matter the query, but if you use this jailbreak or if you use this pattern, you can get response irrespective. So what that is, or the use case for that is, it focuses, or this paper focuses on the harmful part. So whenever you use such strategy with harmful intent or trying to get information marked as harmful, and it's also layered to specific areas, which is the CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. So they are proposing quite an interesting concept called constitutional classifiers, and it borrows ideas from different parts, but a name to remember is the Swiss cheese. So the Swiss cheese is like the stack layer of different things, and just to improve like defense kind of. So it's just like a Swiss cheese having like a stack of different things together. So the claim is this imperfect filters yield practical robustness at deployment scale. So having this like stacked kind of filter, or having these guards in front and at back of the model, kind of improve robustness, and it's also deployment viable. Cool. So 3 things that they consider, or 3 heuristics they are looking at as to what they want to achieve with having this, is it must be robust, meaning it can handle jailbreaks and it's resilient, it can recover fast. It must be viable for deployment. That means that we should be able to get it into production and we should be able to use it in our system. So it should just not be like a prototype or a demo, but it should meet whatever it takes for it to be deployed in the real world. And it should be flexible. By flexible, it means the recovery rate. So how fast can this style or this strategy, get better or adapt, or how fast is it to get a fix whenever there's like an attack that was successful? So how fast is it to recover? So that explains like the abstract to intro part of it, and these are my thoughts as I move through. So while reading these 3 sections, some open questions I had in mind you, these open questions are unlayered, meaning I haven't dug deep into the technical details, I haven't dug directly into. So it's unbounded. One thing is, do layered classifiers genuinely reduce risk or simply shift vulnerabilities onto the classifiers themselves? what new attack surfaces emerge from this layer? So thinking about it, normally, if you want to improve defense, adding more defense makes sense. Generally, it sort of requires more effort. That's straightforward. Now, the interesting thing is, how does this affect the dynamics of interaction? What are the new attacks surface that we're exposing, and what other vulnerabilities might come out of this? So with every new component you introduce to a system, there's also like a shift in like the attack surface, the threat models, and how things play out. The dynamics of interaction also change. Another thing I observed is robustness is reported as reduced jailbreak success, but how is that measured, and what exactly measures this? So some of the things, it's coverage and resilience. So those things stood out. Now, if classifiers are trained on similar data architectures, do their errors correlate, undermining the independence assumed in the Swiss cheese metaphor? And the reason this is if the architectures are the same, or if whatever it is that makes them a defense system is the same, that's in terms of the classifier specifically, right? It means if you break through one, it's easy to break through the other safeguard. So that's a question that came to mind. Are they the same? Are they trained on similar data? What's the distinctiveness between both the one placed in front and the one placed behind? How large does this constitutional layer grow over time? So because the classifiers are trained on a constitution, if I got that correctly, and how large does this grow, and how often do we have to update? And now we have a new dependency on constitution. What biases can be there? What are the hidden things that could also be infused in that? Can we get the constitution from the classifiers? Another interesting question would be, what happens if the constitution sort of gets updated, maybe maliciously, and it allows something to bypass? How easy would it be to detect that this is going through because the constitution allows that? And now we have an interesting dependency on a constitution. So that introduces like new form of interesting complexity. How do we balance the line between malicious use and enabling certified researchers? So for this one, the paper specifically said non-expert users. So this is partially answered. So it's just for non-expert users, and how this LLMs with advanced capability can make them very, very effective. Now, do this maintain robustness across language? So yeah, how does this play across multiple languages? A good question. Since the Constitution is written in English, how do we make it more global? Are all the flag jailbreak attempts by classifiers used to strengthen the core model? So yeah, how does this buoy back, or how does this things that are being flagged, how are they passed back to the model itself to strengthen it? Because at the end of the day, the core is the model. So the best defense is having the core model. One of the best defense will be having the core model equally as strong as whatever defense system we design around it. Some context on patterns observed is, this seems to be like a safeguard pattern, and the pattern itself is like layered defense, and it's similar to what you see in aviation or cybersecurity. So if you go in aviation, you have like, you go through the airport, you go through different security checks, and that is just like a form of layered defense to reduce catastrophe. There's also things like checklists which pilots go through. Now, this also brought up some interesting questions I thought about. Is, if every defense has its hole, now if we have the safeguards or this classifier system, what would a scenario look like when all the holes align? That means an attack that successfully bypasses it, which is in time actually the universal jailbreak thing. So, but what would all holes being aligned in this defense, or all vulnerabilities aligned, look like? How should we expect correlated failures in practice? Back to the same questions, are this input and output designed differently or not? And the reason for this is to determine how often vulnerability can pass through the system easily. So this is where it places it, and a good one would be targeting it under adversarial pressure, which is what they simulated in the paper. Extensions and future directions. These are my unique thoughts. Interesting directions this could go. What other things that is different that can be considered? One thought I considered is, do we need safeguards at all? If yes, why? If no, why not? We need safeguards easily from the very top. You would say, okay, yeah, there's proof that with safeguards is much more secured and it's much more likely not to allow jailbreaks compared to having a fully unguarded model. Fine. If that's fine, then we can question other things. Another thing would be, is that the best approach? For now, yes, based on the fact that there is data to support that claim. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. One extension that comes to mind is the classifiers in and of itself, are they static or dynamic? Which is a pretty good question. Are they just static where, based off the constitution, they flag and the constitution itself gets updated? What does dynamic mean? By dynamic, do you mean rotating classifiers, having separate classifiers to introduce a set of variation? So if universal jailbreaks exploit stable weaknesses, introducing controlled variability could make attacks harder to generalize. So this thought is about the fact that, can we rotate classifiers? But that would also mean that we have like variations in how those classifiers are trained or how exactly they flag things. Also, this thought is from a point of proactive measures. So there's the reactive one where once an attack is successful, you update the classifier. Then you update the constitution. Once you update the constitution, the next time such an attack comes, it flags it. That's being reactive. So there's also the part where you're proactive. One of it, which was mentioned in the paper, is streaming prediction, which is as the core model start giving out some tokens and it sees, or it can tell that some of it's already looking like it's going to be an harmful response. It stops in and of itself, or it pauses or flags it immediately. So that's the streaming prediction, which is quite valuable and it's proactive. Now there's also this one, which is the classifier in and of itself. How can we make it dynamic just to add like a variability factor to also make it more proactive? So this led to some questions that I will revisit, which is, should classifiers be static or dynamic? If static, why? If dynamic, how do we govern variability? Is rotating a pool of classifiers more effective than single static ones? How do we strike the balance between strong defensive strategies and practical deployment visibility? What I also interestingly got at is, this is a fine dance between like different defense strategy. How can this be implemented and its scales, and the final part is, how can it meet our deployment needs, especially at Anthropic or like frontier lab scale? So there are obviously maybe much more theoretically rich defense strategy, but can they be implemented in a scalable way? And also, can it meet deployment? So one thing is latency, another thing is refusal rate, because it can be frustrating if you're asking like benign, or like if you're asking very valid questions and the model kind of refuses you. So that fine balance is quite interesting, which is what I think would be unfolding in this paper. Also, a safeguard in and of itself is as strong and valuable as the balance it strikes between robustness and deployability. By robustness is the how good, how does it protect us? Deployability is the actual usage, because if you have a safeguard that is very, very good, but it can't be deployed, then it's not valuable to the lab or like to the people or to the labs or organizations that built this model. So that's the interesting thing so far from the first 3 sections of this paper, and it's quite exciting. Going through some of my highlights from the paper is how this was trained on synthetic data, automated evaluation, and these are some data points that we're seen from introducing day 7 0.3% increase in traffic refusals, which is quite small. Negligible, it's okay, at least for introducing two main components. 23.7% inference overhead. Yeah, this is somewhat high too. Another one is the universal jailbreaks attacks that reliably extracts detailed and full information. The focus is on harmful information, but any attack, anything that can reliably extract information, both harmless or harmful, is quite interesting. But it's a jailbreak because there's some information that are being protected, but you can access it by passing those safeguards. So and the keyword here is reliably. Reliably is a keyword, and that's why it's an issue, because it reveals weakness that are consistently exploited. And these are different ways they work together. Frameworks that train classifier safeguards under explicit constitutional rules. Once there are rules, there can be biases, there can be context, there can be a lot of things with rules. So there's a lot that comes with this. Definitely introduces new variations, and it also changes the game of how attacks come into play. And the streaming prediction of this is a proactive measure. Also, the problem formulation, what exactly made up, or what exactly this is trying to solve, or what exactly drove this research that turned into something practical that they now use. So these are some of it. And universal jailbreaks repeatedly, BRN comes across repeatedly, and it emphasizes the importance of red teaming both classifiers and their deployment infrastructure. This was when someone had a universal jailbreak, and so once someone had that, they had to reevaluate, and they saw that, oh, you should. So now, because there was a universal jailbreak, then they investigated and they noticed a deployment infrastructure flaw rather than classifier vulnerabilities. So that is another thing too that can come into play. So if attackers cannot bypass the classifier, would they go for the deployment infrastructure or some things like that? So these are like the key components that are being captured now for this video. And as we explore, we would revisit or review them. That's it for the first three parts of this paper.